He started with $11 and a borrowed mattress on the floor of someone else's apartment. No degree, no connections, no safety net. Just a notebook full of ideas nobody believed in, including, some nights, himself. This is not a story about luck. Luck doesn't explain what happened to him. What explains it is something much colder, much harder, and far less comfortable to talk about. It's a story about what happens in the space between failure and the decision to keep going anyway. A space most people never learn to survive. He grew up in a small apartment where money was never enough. The walls were thin enough to hear every argument from the apartment next door, and thin enough for the neighbors to hear his own family's arguments too. His father worked 2 jobs and still came home angry, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. His mother counted coins at the kitchen table every single night, recalculating the same numbers over and over, hoping they would somehow add up differently than they had the night before. They never did. He watched all of this in silence. He never said much about it, not to friends, not to teachers, not even to himself in any way he could put into words. But something was being written inside him during those nights at the kitchen table, a kind of quiet, permanent decision that hadn't fully formed yet. By the time he was 16, it had formed. He had decided something most people never decide at all. He would not live like this. Not out of greed, not out of jealousy toward people who had more. Out of refusal. A flat, immovable refusal to repeat the life he was watching unfold in front of him every night. He took his first job stacking shelves at a grocery store after school, then a second job delivering packages on weekends. He wasn't trying to get rich. 16-year-olds rarely think in those terms. He was trying to understand something simpler and more urgent. How money actually moved, who made it, who kept it, who lost it, and why some people seemed to multiply what little they had while others, working just as hard, watched theirs disappear. At 19, he dropped out. Everyone around him said it was the worst decision of his life. His mother cried for nearly a week. His father didn't speak to him for almost a year, not out of cruelty, but because he didn't have the words for what he was feeling, and silence was easier than trying to find them. He moved into a 1-room apartment with 2 other guys he barely knew. He slept on a mattress on the floor because there was no bed frame and no money for one. During the day, he worked whatever jobs he could find. At night, he read business, psychology, biography, anything that might explain the pattern, the invisible thing that separated people who built something from people who simply survived. He didn't read because he loved reading. He read because he was desperate, almost frantic, to find that pattern before life decided for him that he'd run out of time. His first business failed in 8 months. He had poured almost everything he had into it, his savings, his time, his sense of who he was. When it collapsed, he sat in his apartment for 3 days without eating properly, replaying every decision, every meeting, every signal he had ignored because he didn't want to see it. Then he did something most people never do after failure. He didn't blame the market. He didn't blame bad luck or bad timing. He sat down and wrote out, point by point, exactly what went wrong. Not emotionally, but clinically, the way a scientist studies a failed experiment, looking for the variable that broke everything. And then, instead of walking away, he started again. Smaller, sharper, more disciplined than before, because now he had data instead of just hope. His second business made a small profit, enough to survive on, not enough to celebrate, not enough to prove anything to the people who had told him he'd made a mistake, but enough to know the pattern was starting to show itself. His third business is the one that changed everything. It wasn't a brilliant original idea. It was a boring, overlooked problem that everyone smarter than him had decided was beneath their attention. He didn't care about being impressive. He cared about being useful, about solving something real for people who actually needed it solved. While his old friends were posting vacation photos and weekend brunches, he was working 16-hour days in a rented office with broken air conditioning, sweating through summers because a working AC unit wasn't in the budget yet. While they slept in on weekends, he was meeting clients nobody else wanted to meet. The difficult ones, the small ones, the ones that didn't look impressive on paper, but paid the bills and taught him things business school never could. People called him obsessive. He called it commitment. He never corrected them because he understood that from the outside, the two often look identical. For years, there was no glamour in any of it. No private jets, no headlines, no recognition. Just relentless, invisible repetition. The kind of work nobody claps for. The kind that happens in empty offices at midnight while the rest of the world is asleep, unaware that anything is being built at all. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the numbers started to shift. Small growth became steady growth. Steady growth became scale. And scale eventually became something he could no longer manage by himself. So he built a team. People who understood his standards, who matched his hunger instead of resenting it, who saw the same pattern he had spent a decade chasing. By the time the world finally noticed him, he had already been working for over a decade in near total silence. The headlines made it look sudden. It was the furthest thing from sudden.